11. John 11. We like to start with the sermon with the word after our announcements, and then at the end of that, we will worship God. We will take communion. We'll give. We'll fellowship. We'll have a meal together. We ask God to speak to us first, and then we respond with worship. And in that, we've been traveling through the book of John at an excessively slow rate, and it will continue to be slow. Although tonight we are knocking out a chunk of scripture, like maybe it's a good amount. It's intimidating. And we'll continue to finish the book of John and then ask the Holy Spirit where we should go next. And but we've been here for almost 2 years, I think. We're in John 11. I told you it was excessively slow. And we're hitting the story of Lazarus today. And it's just a beast of a story. I'm really stoked to get through it and really get to the resurrection. I'm starting to preach. I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause right now. We're going to pray, and then I'm going to read the passage, and then I'll preach at you. And Father, I just thank you so much for bringing Kelly back safely. Opening the doors that you did for us to get to Ireland, shutting all of those doors, as frustrating as it was in Ireland where we shouldn't have been. And Lord, I ask that our heart would be about mission. And Lord, our hearts will never be about mission until we understand that everything is about your glory. That's where we're going tonight. That's where you always take us, it seems like, in your word. We'll find fulfillment in your glory. So I ask that we would search for that, seek for that our minds would be open to understand the amazing writing of the Gospel of John and the way he puts things together. The way that Jesus speaks so that we come to life. Lord, I ask that we'd have a passion for your word, a passion to study, a passion to worship you, a passion to make disciples. So I ask that you'd go before us this time. Help me to be quick with my speaking, Lord, not to drag out, not say anything ridiculous, to be on point, and ultimately, Lord, it's your word. Holy Spirit, this is your gig, and so I ask that you do what you want. Empower me to speak your word well, and then affect all of us. Draw us closer to you. In your name, amen. John 11, 1 through 16. If you got it, say, I've got it. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, the illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. And the disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. And that Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest and sleep. That's funny. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. I've been reading this passage continuously, like every day since before I went on my last trip to Ireland to pick up Kelly. So it's been a long time, I feel like. And I started with kind of this concept. It was a very basic concept. And then the more I studied, it evolved. And I've really fallen in love with the way that John writes this particular story. My initial reaction whenever reading something like this is, Lazarus dies. We know that Lazarus is going to resurrect. Let's get to the resurrection because that's where we find the power of God. That's where we see the glory of God. That's where we get excited. And I think often we do that far too fast. Not to mention, that's like 40 verses in a day. It's impossible. I'm comfortable with 2 or 3. We're doing 16, and I'm stressed. But in these first 16 verses, without rushing through, we find the entire point of the resurrection of Lazarus. I think often we become so excited about miracles, about amazing things happening, that we forget the point of why they're doing them. And we sell meaning for miracles. Whenever Jesus is doing a miracle, he's not doing it just to be nice. He's doing it with a purpose. And with that as our direction, John gives us 2 primary issues within this text. The first, the most obvious, and really the primary issue is the sickness and eventual death of Lazarus. It's kind of the overarching, like, this is what we're working with. The second issue is the discussion that Jesus has with his disciples. And understanding that discussion is paramount for understanding this scripture. That discussion and one conjunction is what the entire passage lays on. And so at first glance, when you read these things and you look at Jesus' discussion, you look at the death of Lazarus, you don't really kind of see a lot in common. John doesn't seem to make any direct correlation between the 2 events at first. But we've been in the Gospel of John for a while, and what we've learned is that John definitely just doesn't spit out facts so we just know stuff. When he writes with a purpose. So when he wrote verses 8 through 10, it's because at their very core, those verses were connected to the meaning of the death of Lazarus. So my goal today is to drive to the root issue of these 2 stories and ask, what is Jesus trying to teach us about the human condition? What is Jesus trying to show us about his mission in reconciling God and man? Why does Jesus let Lazarus die? Why does he speak to the disciples in the way he does? And I'm going to give you the ending right now. I didn't do this morning, but I think it's going to clarify a lot of things. God will intentionally allow you to go through deep pain because he desperately loves you for his glory, because it will result in your belief. That's what we learn from these verses. God will allow you. Sometimes he'll put you through deep pain because he desperately loves you for his glory, so that it will result in your belief. Not just an initial belief, but continual growth in belief. And to get to that end, to show you why I see that in this text, and I'm not just making stuff up so you feel happy about yourself, although nobody really looks at that and thinks happy. Oh, God's going to allow me to go through deep pain because he loves me. Yeah. But I want to be very biblical. And so I'm going to show you the process from which we arrive to this conclusion. And in order to get to that end, death, love, glory, and belief. I should have told Ray belief. Sorry, Ray. I should have put that on in there. Well, three sounds better than 4. We're going to start with the secondary issue. The conversation that Jesus has with his disciples. It's going to give us the primary issue that the primary story is going to correct. Does that make sense? Good. Great interaction, guys. Really, I could barely even hear myself think. You replied so loudly. John 11, 7 through 10. That's where we're going to start. John 11, 7 through 10. The discussion Jesus has with his disciples says, then after this, he said to the disciples, that's Jesus. Jesus is the he. Let us go to Judea again. And the disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going there again? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. This is secondary matter. You can, if you're a note writer, write secondary matter. It's not the driving point of the chapter. It's not the driving point of the section or even the story we're in, but it is definitely supportive. And it's definitely odd. John does this. He just writes things in. You're like, what does that have to do with Lazarus? But John tells us about this conversation because at its root, it's driving us to ask the question, why let Lazarus die? And it begins with very real danger in verses 7 and 8. Then after this, he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you. And are you going there again? It's important to remember that in chapter 10, Jesus and his disciples were in Judea, right where Jesus was trying to send them back. And they're at the Feast of Dedication in chapter 10. And Jesus starts making claims, divine claims, like I'm God, kind of bluntly. And it starts to rattle the Pharisees and starts to rattle the crowds. And he keeps upsetting these people and making these claims. And they know, man, if you say you're God and you're not, that's blasphemy. And the Pentateuch tells us that if you blaspheme, then you are worthy of death by stoning. So he's making these statements. He's proving it with works, but we tend to put those away when we want to see Jesus as something. So they've chosen what they want to see Jesus as, and the disciples are in the crowd with Christ, and the crowd's getting angrier, and they're going to form a mob and kill them. It's exactly what happens. In John chapter 10, verses 30 through 31, Jesus makes a statement, I and the Father are one, and it says that the Jews picked up stones again to stone him, which means it happened before that even. It's just a bad day. Pick up stones to kill him. You're claiming that you and the Father are one. They understood that as you're saying that you're God, blasphemer. I'm going to kill you now. Jesus is smart. He uses their own understanding of the law to make them change their minds. And you catch relief for a second. It's like, oh, that was crazy. And then Jesus starts making divine claims again. Oh, by the way, I'm still God. And we find in John 10:39 that they tried to arrest him, most likely so that they can stone him. It says he escapes from their hands and he books it across the Jordan to where John the Baptizer was baptizing. So when he says, hey, we're going back to Judea, the disciples' immediate reply is, hey, bro, they just tried to kill you. And if you go back, they're going to finish the job. What are you thinking? And it makes sense to me. They're not acting any different than really any one of us would be if we were in the same situation. They're just protecting themselves. Seems to make sense that if an entire town is trying to kill you, you should avoid the town. The disciples act as maybe I would act, worried for my life, worried for Jesus' life. It makes perfect sense to avoid Judea, to preserve your life. They're scared. And so Jesus gives this reply. So confusing. He says in verses 9 and 10, Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. Jeez. That makes no sense. Do you ever read verses and you're just like, huh? I wish this was a picture Bible. That would make this easier. I do not understand what's going on right now. What's that supposed to mean? Disciples are worried for their lives, and Jesus goes on a rant about when the best time to walk is. Hey, they're going to kill you. Well, hiking at night is scary because you could trip. I don't see a connection. What does that have to do with going to Judea? And the answer is absolutely everything. Just the first pass, you miss all the great writing and implications that John has given. Jesus is actually addressing the condition of their souls. There's something in them that's causing them to doubt. They doubt who Jesus really is, his full identity, what he can really do, what he's actually capable of. I mean, if they really believe that Jesus was God, don't you think it wouldn't be a huge stretch to think, well, God can stop those guys from throwing rocks? Like he created everything, owns everything, holds everything together by the power of his word. He can stop them, little humans, from killing him. The disciples doubt, and that doubt has festered into fear in their lives. Fear for their lives. Now the question I would ask if I were you would be, how in the world do you come to that conclusion based off of hiking stories? And I'd say that's a really good question. You guys are smart. Let me show you. John 11, 9 through 10. I want you to read this, but look at the words, the specific words he said. Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." There's three things that tip us off that Jesus isn't just talking about hiking. Now, first is connotations of night and day. Throughout all of Scripture, what we find is night is always correlated with sin, darkness, blindness, lack of relationship with God. When we speak of darkness or night or blindness, we're talking about separation from God. Particularly, John does that significant amount in his gospel. When we talk about light, we're talking about right relationship with God. You can see, you can walk in the light. Be in the light as he is in the light. I will lead you through the desert with a pillar of fire. It will be your light. In scriptures, in a lot of historical texts, darkness and night is equated with sinfulness, evil. Light is equated with righteousness or good. So we look at night and day and we say, okay, this is leading us into a spiritual discussion. We see this happen in John chapter 3, verses 1 through 2. It says, "Now there was a man named Nicodemus, and he was of the Pharisees. He's a ruler of the Jews, and that man, Nicodemus, comes to Jesus by night." Nicodemus and Jesus talk, and Jesus is telling him, what you need is to believe in me. The reason why you're feeling so spiritually devoid, why you feel bankrupt, is because you need to be born again. You're not saved. You don't follow the real God. You are spiritually depraved. Nicodemus is completely confused because Jesus tells him he needs to be born again, and he's like, that seems impossible. How can I get back in my mother's womb? And Jesus is like, you missed it, bro. And so they talk some more, but what ends up happening is Nicodemus, who came by night, leaves spiritually depraved still. I think by the end of John, he becomes a Christian, follower of Jesus. But in that moment, John tells us this is nighttime. The depraved man came by night and left still depraved. Turn to John chapter 13, verse 30. We see that John uses images like this. He's the only one in the gospel who describes times of the day like this, describes seasons or weather patterns. I mean, he uses the phrase, and now it was wintry. You're like, this is just great writing, man. And so he's putting all these images to make us understand what's actually going on. In John chapter 13:30, he gives us a display of night as being correlated to evil once again. Judas has just been revealed to be the betrayer. They're at the Last Supper. Jesus says, man, whoever dips their morsel of bread in the cup with me is he who's going to betray me. And just so happens Judas does just that. Now, the disciples missed the whole point. They have no clue what's going on. I don't know how they missed it, but they do. But Jesus and Judas know. Judas knows he's just been called out. Jesus has known for a very long time who his betrayer is. And John 13:30 says this. So after receiving the morsel of bread that he dipped in the cup with Christ, he immediately went out, and it was night. He was depraved. He betrayed Christ. There is darkness closing in. Once again, John is equating the spiritual state with night, with darkness. It's no different in John 11, verses 7 through 10. He's saying there's night-mindedness and there's day-mindedness. The second reason why I believe that Jesus is talking about spiritual things, flip back to John chapter 11. Look at verse 9. John 11:9. If you got it, say, I've got it. Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world." That's an odd way to phrase that. Jesus uses the phrase, the light of this world. Back in John chapters 8 and 9, he says this exact statement, but he says, "I am the light of this world," not too long ago, arguing over why he gets to heal blind people and has that power. And as he claims to be God, he says, "You see that beautiful menorah lighting up this temple? I am the light of the entire world. I provide, I protect, I hold you together." Jesus uses that specific phrase and places it right here. And I have no doubt that in the minds of the disciples, they're still remembering, man, Jesus healed a blind guy and they claim to be God by saying he's the light of the world. Feast of Tabernacles, I doubt, was forgotten. Wasn't that long of time in between? So he makes that claim then, and he makes that claim again. And then the third reason why I believe that this is speaking of spiritual issues rather than physical walking is verse 10. "But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." That's a very odd way to speak of sunshine. If you're walking around the night, the sun's not inside you, so you can't see. What? You're going to stumble because the light is not in him. I thought, well, that must be like a weird translation thing. So I looked up the Greek, and that's what it says. In him. Actually, the Greek word for in is en with an E. Why do we have to make things so complicated? But now you know a new Greek word. It's en is in. And so the light is not in him. We don't speak about sunshine, about light that way. I don't need to worry about light not being inside of me if I'm walking at night. That has nothing to do with it. But if you add these things together, what we find is that Jesus is saying you stumble because the light, as in the light of the world, as in Jesus, is not in you. You don't believe in him. You don't believe who I really am, so you stumble over me going to Judea. Jesus is dealing with spiritual transformation issues. You have night-mindedness and day-mindedness. You have night spiritualness and day spiritualness. And he's looking at the disciples and saying, you've got night spiritualness. You don't recognize who I really am. You don't believe in the light of the world. The light of the world is not in you. The reason why you're afraid has more to do with your spiritual condition than the present danger. You have night faith. You walk in the dark, therefore you stumble. Jesus is after the transformation of souls. The disciples don't believe. Most people didn't believe. They're trying to kill him. Mary, Martha, Lazarus, I don't think fully believed. He's after turning spiritual darkness into spiritual light, after creating believers. So that's the secondary issue in the text. John is giving us support for why he's going to allow Lazarus to die and why he's going to resurrect him. And he's laying down the primary issue. This is what Jesus is after. He's after spiritual transformation. And now we get to see how he's going to do that. John chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. John 11, 1 through 6. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sister sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Jesus is after spiritual transformation, and that places the death and resurrection of Lazarus in a whole new light. Namely, it is not about the resurrection of Lazarus. He's going to use that, but he's using that as a means to teach something much deeper. Jesus doesn't just fix pain. He's not after just making you feel happy. He's not after giving you comfort. He's after deep belief. So he's going to use the death of Lazarus to create believers. With that theme, we can break this down into smaller portions and see exactly how he does that. And we see it in 3 ways. We see death, love, and glory. So let's start with death. It's the first reality we run into. Verses 1 through 3, 6 and 14, it says, Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary, and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. Verse 6. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in that place where he was. Verse 14. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. First thing we see is death. The great fear of mankind. Better buckle up. Wear your helmet. My mom made me wear my helmet. I resented her. It'll save your life. Oh, that seems important then. Okay. I'm scared of death. Trying to find means of living longer. We write epics about the fountain of youth. Avoiding death. The great fear of mankind. This is a devastating moment for everyone. Lazarus has died. His sisters, Mary and Martha, grieving. Jesus, his friend, weeps over it. We'll see that in the coming 2 or 3 weeks. They've lost someone that they love. And the last thing I want to do right now is to find a way to relieve the tension, to make it easier to cope with the situation, to make Jesus look like a nicer guy. I just want to follow the plan that John lays out. This is how it happened. Jesus hears of Lazarus' illness. Lazarus, his friend. Lazarus, his friend, is sick. And Jesus has the full capability of healing him. Jesus has the full capability of walking to go meet him and does absolutely nothing. He doesn't rush to his side. He doesn't give him any relief. He actually intentionally stays 2 more days where he is. And Lazarus dies. And where I want to go immediately is, well, it's not that bad because Jesus is going to raise him from the dead. It's got a happy ending, guys. And if you're thinking that, remember, Mary didn't know that. Had no clue that Jesus would raise Lazarus. Martha didn't know that. Lazarus, as he was lying on his deathbed, wanting his friend there, praying for healing that was never given, didn't know Jesus was going to resurrect him. He just thought Jesus didn't come. We sent word. We know he can heal. Where's Jesus? And I'm sure those questions were swirling around in their mind. Why hasn't he come down? Does he even care about me? Has he abandoned us? This moment is filled with deep pain for everyone involved, and Jesus didn't do anything to stop it. This is not the relationship I like to think of having with Jesus? Is it wrong for you to have the capability of preventing pain, but allow it anyway? Why let Lazarus die? It's a hard question. And the answer to that question is in a little conjunction. Verse 6. So when he had heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. That word, start a parentheses here. This is why I love the ESV, guys. Because it's done correctly. Your Bible should say, so, or therefore. So when he'd heard that Lazarus was ill, therefore, when he heard that Lazarus was ill, that's what your version should probably say. It's not a translation issue, it's an interpretation issue. I just almost went on a rant that nobody really cares about. Here's my suggestion. If it doesn't say so or therefore, maybe get an ESV. NIV says yet. I'm going to allow that to slide, but it puts Jesus in a different light than he should be. End of parentheses. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, that means, that word so, that so is so radically important. Everything at this moment hinges on that one little word. John is just a genius writer. Doesn't really lays it together. So when he heard, he stayed. That means that there's a driving reason that was keeping Jesus from going to Lazarus' aid. It doesn't mean that Jesus didn't want to go to Lazarus' aid. That leaves it still completely open and as a possibility. It just means that there's something that's greater of a desire, something greater driving him to stay 2 more days when his friend is ill. He doesn't go to Lazarus' aid because of that word. What does that so push at? And that leads us to the next reality. First we have death. Intentional allowance of pain in their lives. Why? Those are conjunctions. So. Verse 2. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. That's such a good verse. You probably think that's a weird verse to like. I like that verse because this has not happened yet. It happens in chapter 12, verse 3. Turn there real quick. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. That's when that happens. John puts it here. Just so you know, in the future, this happened. Remember? What? It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. Why does John place that verse there? Chronologically, it makes no sense whatsoever. And then he just retells it. Oh, this is when it actually happened. John isn't just spitting out a fact. Oh yeah, Mary did this. That has nothing to do with the story. He's showing us something. Most likely, it was common knowledge that Mary had done this because that doesn't happen very often, ever. John is saying, hey, do you guys, as a church, these books were circulated around the churches. Do you remember Mary who anointed Jesus' feet with all that ointment, that expensive ointment, and then wiped it with her hair? She scrubbed his feet with her hair. Do you remember that? He's showing this to let us know they have a deep emotional bond. You don't just walk up to any dude on the street and clean his feet with your hair. It's not normal. Most of us don't even let people touch our feet. Nonetheless, let them clean it with their hair. No, there's an intimate relationship. They genuinely love one another. That's what John's alluding to. Jesus and Mary and Martha and Lazarus, there's a deep connection with them. There's a brotherhood and sisterhood. There's a bond that they have. So it reminds us of the thing that hasn't happened yet. Because that thing was most likely common knowledge anyway. John inserts this to give us a glimpse of their relationship. But he doesn't leave it there. He's not going to leave us guessing, because we could say, well, maybe not, Nick. Maybe there's something different. So verse 3, he picks up. So the sisters sent to him saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. Well, now we know he loves them. No avoiding it. The illusion was great, but he said it. Verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So 3 times, John's saying, hey, you need to know that there's a deep loving relationship here. You need to know that he loved Lazarus, that he loved Martha, that he loved Mary. He doesn't want us to miss this. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer. Lazarus is dead. I love Lazarus, so I'm going to stay and let him die. That's hard. That's a difficult thing to wrap my mind on. That's not generally how I see love. It's not how I think about it. Letting Lazarus die, putting Mary and Martha through all that pain, allowing Lazarus to die without the friend that he's calling for. Nonetheless, that you could have just healed him and didn't. How's that love? We have so many ideas about love. So many concepts, things that are just bred into us through culture, through our family, through the way we want to view things. We tell Jesus how to love often, I think. How's that love? Jesus takes death and he, by not healing Lazarus, inserts it into the situation. I'm going to allow Lazarus to die. I'm going to allow him to go through this pain. I'm going to allow Mary and Martha to suffer. This is death. And I'm going to give that to them because I deeply love them. How is that love? And Jesus says it's love because it has to do with glory. John 11, 3-4. So the sisters sent to him saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, the illness does not lead to death, for it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, before I jump into this glory thing, the illness does not lead to death. Some people are like, nah, Jesus was wrong. What he didn't mean like he knew he was going to die. He just wasn't going to stay dead. In chapter 13, they try to kill Lazarus again because you can't have a dead guy walking around without kind of thinking Jesus is God. Lazarus had a rough go at it. But he means this illness isn't going to end at death. Really, I think what he meant is it's not about death. Mary and Martha send over people. They come to him. Whom you love is ill. Don't worry, it's not about death. This is about glory. This is Jesus' first reaction. My friend is sick. It's about the glory. It's not about that. It's for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. This isn't about death. It's about glory. It isn't about a quick fix because I care. It's about the glory of God because I love. It's about glorifying me and glorifying the Father. Jesus' love is not so shallow that it's just relegated to making you feel happy or easing your pain or giving you some sort of satisfaction. It's much deeper. It's much more real than that. Jesus' love can allow Lazarus to die because it's eternal. It doesn't end with death. So Jesus' love goes far beyond just removal of pain because it's about glory. And when love is about the glory of God, it doesn't just remove pain, it saves souls. That's what Jesus is after. John 11:14 through 15. This is why I say that's what he's after. Now, Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake, this is back to the disciples. He's tying it all together for us. Remember that conversation we just had? You unite-minded disciples. The light of the world is not in you. You're stumbling. You're scared. I'm glad he died for your sake. For your sake, I'm glad that I was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him. For your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. Jesus glorifying the Father and himself looks like belief for the disciples. Later on in the chapter, we're going to find out that it looks like belief for Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Jesus is after removing their night-sightedness, from stumbling, from depravity, from spiritual brokenness. And the way he does that, the way he creates believers, is through deep pain, through death, because he loves them. And he uses that pain and that death for his glory, and the result is their belief, which is much more important than removing temporary pain. He solved an eternal issue, not a temporary issue. Death, love, glory, belief. Jesus would take that model and not just apply it to Lazarus. If he just did it to Lazarus, I would still think it's kind of cruel. But he does it himself. He would die because of his love for the glory of the Father and of the Son. And the result is salvation for millions of people who were spiritually blind souls. Death, love, glory. I'm going to close with two thoughts. We've missed one verse. Verse 16. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Here's the first thought. This is the saddest verse in the whole section. It's worse than Lazarus being ill. It's worse than Jesus not doing anything about it. It's worse than Lazarus dying. It's worse than the confusion of, how can Jesus just give us pain because he loves us? And why is his glory more important than my comfort? Right? He's always after eternal issues. Just make me happy, Jesus. Serve me. More complicated than all of that. It's more frustrating than all of that. In the end of this discourse about spiritual blindness, spiritual night-sightedness, and death, and love, and glory, and belief, Thomas' answer looks brave. That's where it stops. Sometimes I feel like Thomas gets a bad rap, and then other times I'm like, nope, you deserve your rap. I mean, when Jesus raises from the dead, I kind of understand Thomas's plight a little bit. Dead people don't usually come back, except for Lazarus, apparently, and Jesus. But maybe he's looking and thinking, man, I followed this guy for 3 years, and I'm not opening myself up to the possibility that he's back. I'm not going to believe it. Everybody else is saying it's true, but unless I see this guy for myself, I'm not believing. I kind of connect with that. There was a guy down in Mexico a couple years ago claiming to be Jesus, and people were following him and giving him Rolexes and cars and all sorts of stuff. He got very, very rich. I'm like, unless God tells me personally that guy's Jesus, I'm not going to believe it. And Thomas I feel like is in that same position a little bit, except for Jesus said, I'm going to come back. missed that point. But we call him Doubting Thomas. And I first read this verse and I think, why isn't he called Brave Thomas? Well, it's kind of a tough guy thing to do, right? Jesus is saying, let's go to Judea where they just tried to kill me. And Thomas is like, yeah, I'm a man. He's courageous, but faithless. Missed the entire point of the last 15 verses. Just, I don't know where he was. I don't know what he was doing. Just missed it all. You're scared to go to Judea because you don't believe in the Son of Man. Well, all right, let's go die. No. Believe in the Son of Man. Yeah, we're going to die. Oh, gosh. This is what I feel like Jesus is struggling with Thomas. So we're going to leave him with Doubting Thomas, and we're going to scrap Courageous Thomas. We might end and miss the point, Thomas. He misses everything, and I feel like, man, we do that so much. Thomas is scared for his life. He's concerned with his life. His own safety, his own joy maybe, his own satisfaction, and it's blinded him from seeing Jesus. Who Jesus really is, what Jesus is really claiming to be, the power that is really in his control. He's blinded from seeing Jesus because he's concerned about his safety, joy, satisfaction, his own life. He will see eventually. But I wonder, and this is the great fear, how many of us are actually here? Thomas looks like a great disciple. They all look great, but he tells them all that they're spiritually blind, so that kind of makes it not so great. They follow Jesus, they do miracles with Jesus, they feed the poor with Jesus, they multiply fish and bread. I mean, they're making wine. This is a great, great church, it looks like. Jesus comes in and is like, all of you missed. You look great. You look courageous in the way that you're willing to go die for me, but you really don't believe in who I am. You've missed the point, Thomas. That is the saddest verse in this chapter. The second question, the second thought I'll give you, and then we'll be done. And it is a question. It's not meant to belittle your pain or the suffering that you've gone through or you're going through or that you've witnessed or the empathy you have toward others, but hopefully to open our eyes to an eternal view. How have you misdefined love? Man, I run into so many people, and I myself do this. We often get so mad at God when he doesn't give us what we want or what we think we need. Lazarus is ill. Heal him. You don't need that. At least come down to him. I know he wants it, but he's not going to get it. You obviously don't love Lazarus. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 more days. Man, we get so mad at God. You didn't give me what I needed. You give me what I wanted. We rail at God and claim he doesn't love us when our lives are turned upside down, when we suffer, when we witness pain, when something goes awry, when we can't figure out how to solve this issue in our lives. How have we misdefined the love of God, what it looks like? Because real love right here looks like pain. I'm giving you pain because I deeply love you, and it is for my glory and the glory of the Father, and it's going to result in your belief. It's going to result in you becoming day-minded, not night-minded. Your spiritual reflection is no longer going to be darkness, it's going to be light. It's going to grow you in your relationship with me. Love, sometimes. I'm tempted to say often, sometimes. ushers us into deep pain. And when that love ushers us into deep pain, we can react and get mad at God because within my temporary view, I don't understand it. And so I have to do something about this. Or we can open our minds up to an eternal view and say, what is your love producing? And what we find throughout Scripture is love is always producing the glory of God. That's love. That's the direction of love. That's what love looks like. And when love looks like that, it produces believers. Believers who make disciples. How have you misdefined the love of God and what it looks like? At some point in the next few weeks, we're going to actually get to the resurrection of Lazarus. But I want us to sit in these 16 verses because without them, you miss the glory of the resurrection. He's not just after raising a guy back because he was pals with him. Man, he's after changing eternity for individuals. That's amazing. Death, love, glory, belief. That's the process he runs us through. Let's pray. For giving me like a month to study this passage with Easter and the Feast of Purim and going to Ireland and being sick. And I just really got to sit in it and soak in it and be very frustrated this week with it, actually. I thank you that you allowed me to write a sermon last night. That, if anything, you've spoken deeply to me about love, about pain. And Lord, wherever we're all at spiritually, whether we've got spiritual night-sightedness or we're just growing or we're not believers or we are, or we're kind of halfway in, halfway out, whether we're suffering or just delighted, whatever the season is for us, Jesus, I ask that your love would always be toward the glory of God and would always cause us to believe deeply. God, I want, as Kelly said, my entire life to be about your glory. That's the only satisfaction that there really is. It's the only way I will ever be truly human, functioning within the realm that I was created for. And I ask that for every single person in this room. And Lord, if you, or as you decide to allow us to experience pain, may we view love eternally rather than temporarily. May we not look just for a quick out, but look to the glory of God. In your name, amen. If you're new, we like to worship in a few different ways at the same time. My hope it's gone. I'm going to put that there. It's magic. Really I just lost my whole train of thought. Okay. Here's the deal. If you can worship as you want, you can stand, you can sit, you can kneel, you can dance. We're cool with all of it. We just ask